this before. Maybe there have been pandemics earlier also, there have been world wars earlier also, but at least our generation, we don't have much of a precedent about such things. So I'm going to try and relate some principles of design thinking and try to kind of, crystal ball gaze in the times to come broadly. So that's broadly the agenda. So some of you who have kind of attended my sessions on design thinking, I will quickly summarize it in one slide, and then we will get on to what I think is coming, and then we'll have a Q&A. So design thinking, salient points, it is a highly user-centric problem-solving approach, which believes in user first, technology later kind of an approach. So it keeps the user at the center throughout the problem-solving process, right from problem identification to problem definition to prototype creation, solution generation, testing, and it's an iterative loop. Test, prototype, get feedback, get better. It's kind of that kind of a problem-solving approach. So it's highly user-centric. It is cross-disciplinary. That means it draws from multiple disciplines. It looks at solutions to similar problems which have been solved otherwise and tries to connect the dots. So connecting the non-obvious dots, so to say, helps build on wild ideas. No idea is stupid to begin with. That's one of the tenets in this problem-solving approach. And one builds on wild ideas through encouraging experimentation. And it believes in co-creation and collaboration. Once again, across disciplines, nowadays there is this term called anti-disciplinary approach. That means look at disciplines which are totally against the discipline in which you are operating, and you might get some solutions from there. So it's about collaboration, co-creation, etc. So let's keep the theory bit out, concept bit out, conceptual bit out here, stop that and get into what can happen, what may happen, so to say. Any business has two sides. One is the supply side and the other one is the demand side. Now let us look at both these sides and see what is coming in these times. Now what has happened and what might happen. Let us look at the demand side. A lot of companies may shut down. A lot of industries are facing a problem. So naturally, people are going to be laid off. People are going to have to take pay cuts. So basically, we are facing a cash-strapped customer. Now, how do we tackle this cash-strapped customer is a challenge that we will be facing. On the supply side, the stress is about supply chains have been broken. Some may be beyond repair. Some may recover. Some companies will recover only if they reinvent themselves. Similarly, because of broken supply chains, there is a lot of idle capacity lying around, vendors, processors, etc. Even when the lockdown opens up, they will be having not much jobs to do or none at all, so to say. So we have, in short, we have broken supply chains with
Dr. Kaustubh, you've gone on mute.
oops. Oh, is it?
Yeah, now it's fine.
So you're not able to hear anything?
No, it's just a minute before.
Oh, so up to what time?
Maninder Jeet, you are muting Dr. Kaustubh again and again. Dr. Kaustubh, you are mute. If you can unmute yourself.
I am unmuting myself, but I don't know how it is getting mute again and again.
Now it's fine.
All right. Up to what point was I audible?
So to the last slide.
This one?
Till the ideal capacities.
Yeah. Was I audible till that point?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so I don't really need to repeat now. So business has to now look at both sides, the demand and the supply side, and has to really create win-win scenarios to be able to go forward, to be able to meet the supply side stress as well as the demand side stress. Now, for this, on the supply side, let us focus first. What I see is that we will really have to look at cross-domain synergies across not just the domain that you operate in, but across domains as well. Let me take an example. So it kind of, how do we creatively collaborate to utilize these idle assets? Let us take an example. Suppose you are an, say, appliance manufacturer in, say, some country in Europe. Existing production lines or supply lines are such that you manufacture some key components in your main factory in Europe, and it is sent to an emerging economy in the form of a CKD, completely knockdown kit. And in that emerging economy, you have certain factories which assemble the stuff and distribute it across that region. That's the existing supply chain. Now, you have a, a logistics company which takes these CKDs from this appliance manufacturer's parent factory to various subsidiaries across the world for assembling at their ends. Now, at the emerging economy place, the supply chain might be broken down. Now, how does this company really start looking at the future? Now, by virtue of being a logistics company, the logistics partner has access to large warehouses across various parts of the world. And they probably will be lying idle for some time in the coming future. Now, if this appliance manufacturer, imagine if this appliance manufacturer creates a synergistic tie-up with this logistics partner, who by virtue of having large warehouse space, they come together and set up small compact assembly units, assembly lines at the warehouse, at the logistics person's warehouse place, and start supplying the demand coming from that market. This kind of becomes a synergistic arrangement in the sense that the stressed operational chain, the supply chain of that appliance manufacturer kind of gets shifted to the logistics partner being being an across another domain kind of a partner, gets some additional revenue, whereas the appliance manufacturer actually is able to cut some costs and is able to supply to that same consumer without really compromising on quality, but at a slightly lower cost as well. So these kinds of synergies will create some win-win situations. And these kinds of, now this synergy, what I'm talking about, is not really directly from its own domain. A logistics company and an appliance manufacturing company, somewhere it's beyond direct kind of straightforward vertical integration or backward integration or forward integration. Now, these are the kinds of synergies which I refer to as cross-domain synergies. That is something that will have to be really explored in terms of, I call it as Uberization of the supply side. That means identify idle capacities in your domain as well as some other domains that have got created because of this COVID-19, and see how you can creatively collaborate across domains within your domain to create these collaborative synergies. Creative collaborations is one thing that I'm looking at. Another thing, like for example, these real estate companies. Now, real estate companies are really facing the crunch. As it is, they were. And with this kind of a thing, office space requirements, etc., are going down, commercial requirements are going down. Now, what could some of these real estate companies actually attempt to do? Now, in this similar case of this appliance manufacturer, maybe a real estate company can actually convert its existing properties, not residential properties I'm saying, but some properties which are outside the city, etc., lying idle. Maybe they had planned it for some commercial activities. Maybe can they convert it into some warehouses going forward immediately, and later on maybe somewhere come in the downstream assembling activity also of this appliance manufacturer. Now, this is a very broad example I'm talking about, but the point that I want to communicate is how can you look at creative collaborations, not just within your domain of operation, but across different domains also. For the last 40 years or so, 35, 40 years or so, the just-in-time inventory model has kind of gotten, really efficient, super efficient across all supply chains in the world. Of course, it started about 60, 70 years back with Japanese companies pioneering this. And then in another 20 years or so, rest of the other industries, other countries also caught up. So for the last 40 odd years, we have kind of perfected the just-in-time inventory kind of model, where every piece in the supply chain gets objects, gets stocks just when they are required, which means the system is so lean that there are no buffer stocks. Now, at such times of lockdowns and things like that, not having buffer stocks is actually going against that company's interest, that entire supply chain's interest. Coupled with the fact that these pandemics, if you notice from say 2000, the year 2000, it started with SARS, swine flu, MERS, then Ebola, Nipah, etc., etc., etc. And the frequency of these kinds of, so to say, pandemics is kind of increasing. That means the time gap between these pandemics is kind of, so to say, reducing. So we don't know, we might be in for another event like this in the next couple of years or so, maybe. So now with this kind of a fear psychosis, people, manufacturers across the world are going to be wary of this just-in-time inventory model, which means they are kind of going to keep certain buffer stocks at every level in the supply chain. Now, when that happens, some people in the supply chain are actually going to get more business in the immediate next 6 months. Try to see what you can do and capture that instant spike which is possibly going to come, because people are going to be wary of just-in-time inventory models, just as an insurance to future events of such kinds of pandemics happening. So just start thinking about it from that side, that perspective. Now let's come to the demand side. What are the effects and what are the adaptation that companies need to kind of look at? According to me, the shared services model will get accelerated in the adoption. Now we have shared services model in the service domain, very, very well exploited. In the product domain also, maybe the shared services model will gain accelerated adoption, I feel. Like, for example, for the last few years, I've been hearing of many companies who, let's say, like there's a company called Furlenco, which rents out furniture. That means if you're shifting from one location to the other, you don't have to buy furniture for your house. You can just rent it out from this company called Furlenco on a monthly basis, quarterly basis, annual basis, etc., etc., etc. So it's actually kind of making a shared asset kind of a model. Now, with a cash-strapped customer, one will have to really enable these kinds of models to sustain the consumption levels that customers would want to, and obviously companies also would want consumers to have. That's where the shared services model will kind of get accelerated even in the physical product domain. Pay as you use might become the norm. Pay as you use, as in today, if you want to change a tire of your car, normally, ideally, all 4 tires should be changed to maintain proper alignment and balance, etc. Or at least pairs of tires need to be changed, front 2, back 2, or whatever. But many times, most consumers don't change it in pairs. leave aside all 4 tires, but they don't even change it in pairs. Why? Because tire is not a very cheap thing. It costs anything between 3,000 to 50,000 bucks, depending on the car you drive. So general tendency is to change one tire. Now, I'm just taking this example to to kind of communicate the point that people's discretionary spends are going to come down. People are going to postpone what they don't need immediately, what they think they don't need immediately, and might as well eliminate it for the next year or two, whatever it is. So now I'm taking this example of a tire because that behavior and changing the tire kind of even pre-COVID era, similar behavior was existing. Now, in this case, how does a tire manufacturer kind of tackle this tackle this situation? Suppose tomorrow a tire manufacturer came to you saying, don't pay me 100% selling price of the tire. Give me 25% as down payment, and the rest of it you pay as you use. Now, what does pay as you use mean? Today's car is actually like a computer which happens to have 4 wheels. Computer, I refer to it as a computer because it is equipped with so many sensors. It is equipped with connection to the cloud, telemetry, etc., etc., etc. Now, if the tire manufacturer said that you pay me 25% upfront money and all the sensors in the car capture the information about how the car is being driven. Suppose the car is driven on a smooth expressway, you pay me 1 rupee per kilometer. And if your car is being driven on a rough country road, you pay me 1 rupee 50 paise per kilometer. So to say, these numbers are hypothetical, but then it actually becomes a pay as you use kind of a model. When you consider this pay as you use kind of a model, that means you are letting the consumer use it at a lower upfront cost, but from your side, you are actually making money throughout the lifespan of that product. Earlier model was one time, end of story. Now, this kind of data capture which will happen because of this pay as you use model will also enable, number one, it can track the performance of your tire. So it is great information for R&D, for improvements in the design, etc. Second, alternate revenue streams also could be generated from this data captured. Now, this data which gets captured also shows quite clearly the driving habits of that particular driver. Like, for example, all these sensors can pick up whether this driver is excessively pressing the accelerator, excessively pressing the brake pedal hard, or not managing the clutch properly, etc., in manual transmission vehicles, etc., etc., etc. Now, this information could be useful for a car insurance company. If I am a good driver, maybe my car insurance company might give me a slightly lower premium next time when I renew the policy. A person who doesn't drive too well, maybe he or she is prone to more accidents, bad driving, etc. Maybe his or her premium might go up. Now, these are ways in which this tire company can monetize the data captured and actually subsidize the cost of acquisition for the customer. Now, these are the kinds of models that one really has to think about going forward. I'm coming from a single perspective of having to deal with a cash-strapped customer. How do I capture that person's imagination, and how do I induce purchase and not let that person think, oh, I don't have too much money, let me forget about this product completely. How do you kind of get into that space is my point. So pay as you use might become the norm. Fractional ownership models might come in if you are selling something, some expensive offerings, etc. Can you think of fractional ownership models where multiple people own one asset, the use of that asset gets distributed amongst the group owners, etc. Now, if I have sometime talked about a company called NetJets. I think I haven't. Whenever I've interacted with 2 or 3 of your batches, I've spoken about that NetJets, which used to be a company selling aircrafts. About 22 years back, they realized that how many super rich people exist in the world who can buy an aircraft? Their market was saturating, their growth was not as much. So they opened up a segment which is slightly less rich than the real super rich folks, say, who are equally busy but are equally busy, need an aircraft of their own, but do not have the cash flow to suddenly shell out 250-300 crores from their cash flow and buy an aircraft on their own. So they came into the market with a fractional ownership model where they got 4 or 5 people similar to that category and started selling aircrafts as a fractional asset to these guys. Now I see, going forward, tackling a cash-strapped consumer, one will have to have certain adoptions of this fractional ownership model as well coming into the picture. How and what? Let all of you start thinking about how, and the modus operandi of trying to kind of inculcate some of these models that we've been talking about. Now, yeah, this is pay as you use, we talked about. So, yeah, I mean, then I would say a cash-strapped customer will appreciate unbundling of services. So, how, in your offering, how can you unbundle your services just the way airlines have done? Low-cost airlines charge X for food, Y for window space, Z for aisle seat, etc., etc. So they are actually unbundling these services. So going forward, tackling a cash-strapped customer, cash-strapped consumer, think how you can unbundle your products, your services, and make things within reach of that cash-strapped consumer. Now, looking at certain opportunities that will come up. Today, in this tackling the COVID situation, there are 3 agencies tackling the whole situation: government, private sector, and NGOs. These 3 are at their own levels somehow trying to control this whole pandemic. Now, what I see is that the government has the resources, but they have very little control or zero control over last mile execution. Private sector has the capability of last mile execution, but they lack the trust of the people. They don't have the trust of the people. NGOs have trust of the people, but they do not have scale in operations. Now, these are 3 vertices of a triangle, which, if one can create some mechanisms, platforms, ventures, which can complement all these 3, in the sense that, can you create something which can give the government the power of last mile execution, which can give the private sector an iota of trust, and which can give NGOs the ability to scale, to reach out scale. I don't have solutions for this, but in your respective domains, think how you can create platforms for, I repeat, platforms for government to establish last mile execution capability, for private sector to capture public trust, and for NGOs to be able to operate at scale. So in your domains, think how you can create these synergies. All right, going forward. All right, till this point, do we have some comments or something that you want to ask me before we go ahead? All right, let's move. Opportunities wise, hello? Yeah, I call this the microscope moment of the 21st century. Why microscope moment of the 21st century? Because when 200 years back, when the microscope got invented, we could see a whole world of bacteria and viruses and microbes, which was completely invisible to us. Before that, when people died of some disease or something, couldn't be diagnosed properly, could be God's wish, etc., etc., etc. Now with the microscope, the medical fraternity kind of got the ability to pinpoint the cause of those diseases. And once the cause of those diseases were pinpointed, automatically the vaccinations and the medicines for those started getting evolved. Now, today, what is our problem? In this COVID space, we have to take out blood samples to do testing. Now, at such massive scales, this kind of testing is just woefully inadequate. So what are the non-contact testing at massive scales kind of mechanisms that one needs to look at? I'm sure a lot of people are looking at it. That's where I feel high resolution cameras, which are capable of capturing the molecular signatures of these microbes at mass scales, needs to be really looked at. Now, here there are multiple pieces. One is the hardware, high resolution infrared cameras or whatever cameras or whatever optical devices to capture these molecular signatures of these microbes. And at the same time, at the back end, you need large data sets of these molecular signatures of these microbes, which means whatever is captured on the hardware will have to be matched with the backend data set, and actual microbes, viruses, etc., could be pinpointed where they are coming from which person it is originating, etc., who is infectious, who is non-infectious. Maybe this is too futuristic, maybe 4 years down the line, 5 years down the line, but if research begins now, it will come to fruition later. And these kinds of things will get a lot of funding. Today, that's the need of the hour. And these backend data sets, I'm saying, could be synced with the cloud, whereby all these could be recognized at the point of origin, if not at the point of origin, but at least somewhere close in that perimeter of origin. And despite all this, if it spreads, it's going to be used for segregation, picking out infectious, non-infectious folks, etc., etc., etc. People might say privacy will get, activists might say privacy will get hindered, etc. But at such times, I think to prevent these pandemics from going up, privacy takes the second seat. Wearables capable of capturing, taking new parameters beyond what they already do. All these pandemics are throwing up different parameters, different ways of testing. So that's something which is the area for upcoming research, and already, in fact, not upcoming, it already must be happening to a large extent. Just 15-20 days back, I was reading that the world is facing a shortage of 6 million nurses today to tackle this pandemic. Now, that means these 6 million new people need to be trained to be nurses. Now, how does training happen at such massive scale? 6 million is not a small number. That's where I feel virtual training at massive scales needs to come in. A lot of edutech companies are looking at the typical conventional sources of opportunity, which is the school education, college education, etc. But these niches are being missed. 6 million, of course, is not a niche. Now, virtual training of 6 million people, because obviously physical training cannot happen at these times, and it requires so many resources. That's where virtual training. Now, training a nurse cannot just happen by giving lectures online. Nursing is an immersive profession where the nurse has to be around the hospital bed, around the patient in an operation theater, etc., etc., etc. So that's where augmented reality, virtual reality, to give these nurses a realistic feel through virtual training. So that kind of content in terms of AR and VR is something that I feel will be the need of the hour. Next, again, nursing is not a profession which can just be done even with augmented reality, virtual reality also. the nurse has to be given a touch and feel of human anatomy and physiology. That's where companies in the 3D printing space could actually connect with these virtual training platforms and be able to give the touch and feel of human anatomy physiology. So going forward, those are opportunities which I see in that specifically in that space. Because of the fear psychosis, all touch-based products at public places, people are going to be wary about. So in the long run, those will have to go non-contact, either sound activated or whatever other iris activated, etc., etc., etc. Some technologies already exist, and that is going to get accelerated. But to convert all touch-based products at public places into these non-contact control mechanisms, it will take probably 2-3 years. But in the meanwhile, there are these nanotech products, silver, etc., silver nanoparticle based products, which are kind of longer lasting disinfectants. So not disinfectants, but at least, and they have some antimicrobial properties. Now, in that space also, the existing touch based interfaces will probably have to be sprayed with these kinds of things, and these sprays last long. They're not just one time kind of usage. So people in that space also should be starting to look at, and this kind of a thing will remain till the time that these non-contact control things start coming into the market. So the next 2-3 years, these are the things which will gain gain traction. One, with maybe the government or regulatory authorities will make it mandatory for any new touch-based surface coming into the market to be coated with such things. In the meanwhile, existing stuff also will be, there will be a demand for existing stuff to be coated as well. So it's OEMs as well as existing market that can be exploited for these kinds of products. Tourism might have to take the help of VR and AR. I mean, physical movement for tourism, I feel, is not going to come back anywhere near the normal for another 1.5 to 2 years. Tourism, according to me, has two sides. One is the sites or the properties where we like to go to, and the other one is the enablers who take us there, like airline companies, travel agents, etc. Now, the interest in having a look at the properties is an inherent human nature. Whereas going there is not going to be possible because of this fear psychosis and the pandemic event happening. So, but the interest to see those places still remains. So what will these property owners do? Property owners in the sense, the sites that we visit, the museums that we visit, etc. They will also probably have to take the use of VR and AR to give us that experience, an immersive experience to us sitting at home. How can one monetize those opportunities is something that one can have a look at. This is where I will stop. This is, and let us take some Q&A. Yeah.
Any questions from the startups? Or maybe drop your question on the chat box.
Kaustubh, do you think that on the point where you mentioned that touch won't be, the touch-based experience would be changed? So do you think that
Could you speak a little louder?
So do you think that cash would be less prevalent in the society? Society would be moving to more digital modes of payment?
I think that's already happening, no? Isn't it? I mean,
Yeah, that is
wherever
happening, but would it
we are
accelerate or?
staying, Of course, it got accelerated through demonetization. And I think the second, it has gone into fourth gear now possibly, because how do we operate now? In our buildings, the vegetable vendor keeps something in the lobby. We go collect it and the payment is done through some app, right?
Yeah.
So yes, I mean, that's another push towards digital, stronger push. Demonetization was one. This is going to be even stronger possibly. How are you making your payments to your maid servants and all? Are they coming and taking cash, or you probably transferred it through Google Pay or something like that?
Using Google Pay.
Yeah. So, and that's happening across, right?
Right.
Can you think of some cross-domain synergies that I was talking about? Can you identify in your spaces some synergies, how to use idle capacities in the broken down supply chains? If you can aggregate certain demands, if you can aggregate the demands from the major industries, as well as aggregate the idle capacity on the supply side, you might become an important player in that whole industry. Start thinking on those lines. How can you make that happen? Because according to me, there are going to be a lot of opportunities around there, provided you have your antennae up at all times.
So interestingly, Kaustubh, just making a comment here.
Yeah, who's this? I can't.
Yeah, Arjun, this side. We
Arjun.
talked about this rare disease company when you were in Mandi. Can you hear me?
I couldn't hear the last bit. Sorry.
Yeah, we had a word. I have a rare disease company. We talked about some decision support system, and at the time you were suggesting how different ways of taking the data could be interesting. So I just wanted to make the comment that, that slide was really interesting, where you were showing that synergy with the government, NGOs, and the private sector. And we are actually seeing some of that happen. I mean, we see that, companies, this slide, that the research side, research players in the market, they somehow do believe that, if we are building some research, it's the product companies that can really create a product out of it, which can be sustained. And then the last mile, actually, there are players like CDAC, which are implementing telemedicine across India. So we are trying to leverage their reach and penetration so that we can kind of, cater to a poor patient, but, through this system where, somebody can feed symptoms at the remotest corners and they can get centralized help using the platform that we are building. So just wanted to say it was a pretty cool. I think there are many questions coming on. Just wanted to say.
In fact, in healthcare, I mean, honestly speaking, I see the breaking down of the existing hospital. Today's hospital has its own pathology lab, has its own radiology lab, has its own XYZ, it has internal infrastructure completely inside. Now, SRL has completely kind of, last few years, they have broken it down, shared services model. So what you're saying, a lot of hospitals will have to break down to cut costs. Again, a shared services model coming in there. And that is going to happen in other spaces as well. And see as startups, what kind of opportunities you see there. All right, yeah. Some questions in the chat box, let me check. Kamal Thakur, is the demand of employees' productivity web app tools going to increase post-COVID? Productivity web app tools? Yes, I think so. Yeah, it has already happened. I mean, digitization, digital adoption, this is a big jolt towards positive digital adaptation, right? So yes, that's something which is bound to happen. Now, how do you check the productivity of a person working from home? there are things existing, but those will have to get refined. So web app, productivity app, web app tools, yes. Pooja Thakur saying, could you please give your views on that? There are many nurses graduated but still have no jobs. During this pandemic, nurses are needed. What about post-COVID situation? Yes, I mean, today, a lot of people are nurses who are trained and do not have jobs have the option of volunteering right now. I mean, still we are falling short of people, right? Still, that's that statistic of 6 million shortage of nurses. About 20 days back, I think I read it in some McKinsey report or I think 80 Kearney report. 6 million nurses shortage all over the world, which is not going to be filled up through physical education. That's where there is huge scope for virtual online education coupled with AR, VR, coupled with 3D printed human anatomy. So I see that big time. Ganesh Chari, I'm dealing with e-waste recycling. Is it good to reach to other recycling companies that are under critical condition? What should the strategy be for startup when they reach established company? All right. Any kind of waste today is like cash in hand because everybody wants to conserve cash. So any company would like to monetize the waste that it already has. So if you can identify some other non-value adding assets which are lying around in a company, and if you can give them the platform of recycling and hence an avenue for monetizing it, that's companies are going to appreciate it for sure. Like for example, just a few days back, I was talking to a startup which makes coatings, which if applied on the inner linings of their furnaces or furnaces in factories, saves about 17% of the energy cost. There are some coatings that they have come up with. They have a patented coating. I mean, patent on that. Coatings which save, if applied on the inner walls of a furnace, help that company save about 17% of energy costs. Now, this kind of a company, he is finding difficulty penetrating that customer. I'm talking not during COVID, even pre-COVID. Now, if this startup stays focused only on trying to convince the efficacy of the coating, somewhere that person is missing the bus, I feel. But if he or she changes his offering by saying that I will help you save energy costs in your factory. These coatings are one way of doing it. And suppose this guy gets into a collaboration with some other energy saving products, like somebody giving solar, somebody giving wind energy, etc., and creates an entity or consortium of doing an energy audit for the client and suggesting all kinds of ways in which energy conservation can happen. Can he enter the market better than just with a coating? Ganesh, I'm trying to answer your question. Ganesh, is this making sense? I think he's muted. All right. Okay. Yep. Anything else?
I think Dr. Kaustubh, there are two more questions from this.
Okay.
From
Raghavendra, do you think some traditional sectors like agri and textile can bounce back relatively sooner? Also, the large dependent population is a strength due to job losses in other sectors. Well, I feel a lot of reverse migration has happened back into the countryside. So companies operating in the countryside will have access to labor, which has gone out from cities back to their villages. So if you have some setups there, you are going to get access to skilled labor as well, trained labor as well. Because these people are not going to come back to the city for at least the next 6 months, 7 months. That's my reading. So you're right. Job losses in the city will create, if there are opportunities, if there are industries which suddenly get active in the hinterland, they are going to get access to a pool of well-trained people. Yes. Pankaj Singh, due to this COVID-19 pandemic, what are the fresh challenges startups going to face if they want to expand across international geographies? Depends on what kind of items you are talking about in terms of geographies. See, let us look at cash-strapped consumers. So if a consumer is spending, say, $100 monthly, essentials, groceries, education, etc., take away maybe 40-50% of that basket. What is the remaining discretionary spend? That discretionary spend is going to come down. And if your product falls in the discretionary spend category, then there is going to be a challenge for sure. Just some days back, I was talking about somebody I know, a startup. She has a consortium which exports art items to US. Now that is going to get a hit. Firstly, because supply chains are disrupted. Plus, the supply chain is a highly contact-prone supply chain. Now, with the fear psychosis, I think all these contact-prone supply chains are going to come under a lot of suspicion. The way I see going forward is in this logistics business, the Japanese, very finicky about hygiene. Next, Europeans, Germans to lead, and the other Europeans, and then Americans, and then South Korea. These countries are going to set up very stringent audit parameters for all logistics companies. How do these logistics supply chains become whatever, virus-proof, micro-proof, whatever it is, whatever you call it, to prevent spread of such kinds of pandemics? Now, the way I see is that, probably the big four, McKinsey, Bain, etc., will possibly start another practice of auditing these supply chains. Or maybe virologists and logistics chains will come together to set up parameters. WHO will probably enforce these parameters in the next 6-7 months, possibly. So, and if you, maybe if you are a doctor, virologist, healthcare professional, maybe combined with some healthcare person, try to set up norms for these kinds of things, sanitization, disinfection, etc., etc., etc. All these supply chains are going to come under the scanner, and that's where there are opportunities there. Food Viram, how do you see healthy meal segment post-COVID, especially at a place like a dhaba where people prefer taste? Tough things. Who are you catering to? I mean, what is the customer segment that you're catering to? Is the question that needs to be asked. No? Is it the health conscious segment? Is it the, just a casual eater who passes by, eats and goes? That's something that you'll have to look at. Do you think investors would invest in new companies over Zoom calls without having met in person? Well, I mean, maybe the cycle of investment will get a little more stretched if an investor used to close a deal in maybe 3 months. Today it will go on for 4 months. A lot more due diligence will have to be done. They will prefer to do a lot more due diligence because they haven't met you, they haven't seen you eye to eye. So difficult to kind of build trust. Yes, so I feel yes, maybe the investment time required might be a little more, might get us a little stretched. All right.
Yeah, I think we are done with the questions.
Yep.
So,
Okay.
any other question from the startup? Just the last few minutes we have.
Amit.
So, one more question from Amit.
Hi, Amit. I remember you. Last time, I think we met in March.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, Amit. What is the question? It went away somewhere. Wait. Yeah. What's your thought on service-based industry, which is based on another process? I mean, I didn't quite get your question. Sorry, Amit. Can you rephrase?
If yes, I can.
Yeah.
If we have an industry like mine, for example, we are a marketplace for solar, which is
Yeah.
based on solar getting installed.
Yeah.
Okay, so we people who want solar to who provide solar, and then finally somebody else has to go ahead and install solar. And similar services come into play based on software and things where people get connected, and then there is another service provider or a product provider. How do you see options for those?
So you are a B2B2C kind of a player, is it? Right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Right.
B2B2C, right?
Right.
So fundamentally, if I were to apply the same principle that you are dealing with a cash-strapped customer, how can you kind of create certain synergies in your B2B space to be able to cater to the same customer at probably a lower cost without compromising on quality?
I don't think we are dealing with a cash traps customer right now.
Okay.
The main problem we are facing is that COVID के बाद देखेंगे. That's the standard line.
COVID के बाद देखते हैं times.
हाँ,
Okay, yeah.
that is people are not strapped of cash.
Plus also, what is the urgency of that change to come about? People in their mind, as you rightly said, I mean, everybody is saying that बाद में देखते हैं, अभी lockdown खुलने दो फिर देखेंगे. Yeah. No, that's going to stretch. No, that's going to stretch. So in the meanwhile, conserve as much cash as you have.
That is something that we can do.
Yeah. Plus, still I feel that decision for setting up a solar, whatever cell, solar roof, etc., is just getting postponed, right? Is getting postponed.
Yeah.
Another thing is that if you are dependent on some Chinese suppliers, look at whether that supply chain still exists or not.
That exists. Thankfully, that exists.
If suddenly it breaks down, maybe are there other supply chains from where you can source?
With our industry, thankfully, we have that. We have more than A to Z backup. We have A ka backup, B, C, D. So we are pretty secure on the supply part of it as an industry. As not just me, as an industry. Completely.
So it's just that when the demand will pick up. So
yes.
You'll have to wait and watch.
Demand is not picking up right now because of the fear factor rather than of cash factor. People have money. And rather they feel the need of solar more now because घर पे बैठे हैं तो बिजली ज़्यादा use होती है. Suddenly bills have gone up.
Yeah.
First they used to go to office. Now they're not going to office. Now
Correct.
The AC runs more. There are more people in the house. So they feel the effect. My basic part of this was how do you keep in touch, engage, or do something like that to have them maintain the interest till the time comes. And the time could be 10 days or 10 months.
Now, I don't have a ready-made answer to that, but at a broad level, what I would say is if you have contact with that set of consumers, can you keep them engaged with something other than solar just to maintain that contact?
I had not thought of.
Like for example, I'm giving a very crude analogy here. Swiggy and Zomato suddenly from 22nd March lost business. True?
Correct.
Yes or no?
Yes, definitely.
It took them 15 days to get into grocery delivery. So The principle that I'm talking about is you have an existing customer base. What other need can you satisfy of theirs in order that you don't lose contact? Getting what I'm saying?
I actually understand that. I hadn't explored that.
So
to a very large
if
extent.
there is anything that will help you monetize that service also, and as well as stay in the horizon of the customer till the lockdown opens and till your people can go and install stuff.
Okay. All right. Monetize maybe no, but engagement definitely.
Maybe, I mean, once you start,
some-
you never know what can happen.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. Thank
Yeah.
you. Thanks a lot.
All right. Cool.
Yeah, I think we're done. Thanks,
Okay.
thanks, Dr. Kaustubh, for sparing your valuable time.
Thank you very much. Pleasure.
The last question that you answered was really great and helpful for all the startups. How to engage your clients and your customers for a long time, so that they don't forget you in future.
I feel we only focus on what we do. We somewhere miss out on what can be possible. So, as a parting note, I would say that please kind of examine the changed user journeys of your existing customer base. Please examine the changed user journeys of your existing customer base and see what else can you put in your basket of services. All right.
Sure, thanks.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Dr. Kaustubh. Thanks for joining. Thanks, startups.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Take care.